Hey there cats and kitties, I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video I'll be discussing my thoughts on the anime series Mahou Shoujo Madoka Magica, aka Puella Magi Madoka Magica, a series that I had highly recommended to me several times over the course of my tenure of reviewing anime, both episodically and full series reviews, especially from people who knew that I was a fan of Gen Urobuchi's work from Psycho Pass to Suisei no Gargantia, and he is the primary writer on this series, pretty much from what I've told, given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted story-wise, and he was very much interested in exploring and deconstructing, in a mirror darkly, if you will, the magical girl genre of anime. And this is a genre that I'm not, one to really get into. It's not really my bag. And I didn't know what to expect with this series. I have to admit that I'd actually forgotten he had a hand in it when I decided to finally pick up with it after having it recommended to me so many times. And for the first 9 episodes out of the 12-episode series, I have to say there were so many things that I felt he telegraphed anywhere from a whole episode to 2 whole episodes ahead of time, where you could see a lot of it coming, a lot of the story plot points and everything coming. And it wasn't until episode 10 and the last 3 subsequent episodes, 10, 11, and 12, that it had entirely reworked my perceptions on the series and just absolutely became gangbusters and blew my mind, essentially. Very much being sort of based within the confines of the magical girl genre. You're dealing with 5 primary characters surrounding that particular trope, the titular Madoka Kaname and her friends and acquaintances as she meets or is already introduced to them by series open. And basically they come into contact with this small, kind of sort of alien-looking cat-like creature called Kyubey, who is very potentially malevolent. You're not quite sure where you're going to be, standing as far as his characterization, as far as are you for him, are you against him, do you understand where he's coming from? Because he is very manipulative from the get-go. It is through him that essentially these girls are made to form a contract in their teenage years to become magical girls, and they get to have a wish, their all-time penultimate wish granted for them if they so choose to make this contract, after which time they will be imbued with powers and have to fight for, I guess, eternity, maybe, these entities known as witches that have taken over the world. They're like these dark entities and everything like that. And of course there's magic. There's sort of a very interesting, the way they animate it, when you are confronting a witch as a magical girl, the entire sort of scenery changes. It's almost like you go into this pocket universe, if you will. And it's just very intriguing because in the case of Madoka, she has a friend who very much easily succumbs, almost too easily, face-palmingly easily, succumbs to making this contract because she has hopes and wishes for someone else. She's very selfless. This is the character of Sayaka, who is decked out essentially in a blue outfit, and she has blue hair to match and everything. And that's kind of interesting too. Each of the characters has a sort of color code, if you will. Madoka is very much the pink character, sort of the I don't know if it would be, safe to say that it is the most common denominator in Magical Girl, that she would have the color pink and everything like that, at least the girly girl aspect of it, that would be her color. But Sayaka, she has reasons that go beyond selfishness. She's thinking of others and makes this contract for someone who she cares about very much. And unfortunately, even though, and this is kind of falling in line with the telegraphing aspects of the story, I feel like from the get-go, Urobuchi sets to work to let you know that there are consequences if you make this pact, this contract with this little cat creature, Kyubey. There are going to be consequences, there are going to be repercussions, and there's going to be a price that has to be paid. In the early going, both Sayaka and Madoka meet this girl, Mami. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I don't remember if that's how it's pronounced. But she is a girl decked out primarily with the color yellow, and also sort of blondish hair, yellow hair to match. And she is kind of like the, go-to girl because she's already a magical girl. She's pretty much badass when we first are introduced to her. But very shortly into the story do we see that she is going to be the example by which these girls are going to have to gauge whether or not they want to make this pact. There's something sort of a shocking twist from what I'm told is the usual reaction, although I saw it coming through, you know, some of the dialogue and everything like that. The fate that befalls this Mami character very early, you know, in the early going of the series, that again will affect Madoka and Sayaka in making their decision. They are very much having reservations, and they also come into contact with who is, out of, you know, this series by the end, a new all-time favorite anime character, Hamura Akemi. She is a girl who is decked out primarily sort of black and white, and, you know, black hair, and black is the predominant color of her entire visage. But she is somebody who is, whereas Mami is trying to, you know, maybe make these girls think about it and choose whether or not they want to become magical girls and make this contract with this little cat creature Kyubey, she is very much adamant to try to make them not choose to make the contract, most specifically Madoka. And there's a reason for that plays heavily into the story that, you know, marks just the expert characterization, and very much do we have the reveal. You know, it's very much that reveal in episode 10, which was the turning point for me as far as how much more mind blown I was with the series, and how much more I'd gone from thinking it was much the sort of paint by numbers, you know, I could see everything coming, predictability of the story. Suddenly it had flipped it on its ear and introduced time travel as a factor in doing so, which is my, you know, my all-time favorite sci-fi sort of genre or trope, time travel. Not in every estimation, but definitely in the majority. I always go back to time travel, and it's one of my favorite things. My all-time favorite novel is The Time Machine, and usually I say my all-time favorite film is the 1960s George Pal Time Machine. And so time travel is always something that will win me over if done right and utilized right. And Gen Urobuchi does not disappoint in introducing this factor into the story, as the entirety of episode 10 tells us the backstory of the relationship of Hamura and Madoka, respectively, and time travel is the central device through which we see this story unfold. And suddenly, the entirety of the series took on a new light for me with that introduction, and with the exploration of Hamura's character and the sacrifice that she would go through multiple times through multiple timelines, spoiler warning, I guess you could say, mild spoilers, in order to try her damnedest to make Madoka not, you know, fall into that contract. And there's a grander scope to the entirety of the affair along those lines that she's trying to prevent as far as the fate of Madoka goes. And it's very intriguing how, again, Urobuchi, in his approach to this, you know, this deconstruction of the magical girl genre, where not everything is all, you know, wine and roses, and not everything is going to play out happily ever after. There are sacrifices that have to be made, and some of these characters do not survive, at least until, to a point, how it all comes to an end, how it crescendos to an end, where things become very much a concept. You know, we're seeing the entirety of the universe being affected, and perchance multiple universes, multiple dimensions, time dimensions, all these different things. You know, we're seeing down at the very core, the very center of this series, the relationship between Madoka, her family, which was a very pleasant surprise for me. There's sort of in the early going, we see, you know, that she goes to her mother for advice and everything like that. And her mother actually comes heavily into play when she's finally at the point where she has to make a decision one way or the other. Yes, make the contract. No, do not make the contract. Is she going to be forced into it? Is she going to go willingly? You know, that kind of situation. And the mother comes heavily into play to give her advice toward the end. And I really loved that familial aspect, because we're seeing the compassion within which, you know, Madoka possesses, as far as she's not taking things for granted. She's looking at the bigger picture. She's looking at her relationships and the dynamics she's had in her friendships, in her familial relationships. She has a father, a mother, a younger brother, a little baby brother. And we see that, without wanting to spoil what her choice is, there is a higher concept going on when that choice is finally made that really does, you know, impact the entirety of the universe the series takes place in, but also expounds outward, as I say, to touch multiple dimensions all throughout history, sort of the entirety of the history of the magical girls as defined within the series. And very much is that something that Gen Urobuchi also puts under the microscope, the sort of character tropes and the archetypes most familiar to anime viewers, with the Sayaka character being very much selfless and somewhat nervous in the beginning, and she, arguably overcomes that to a point. You also have a character who's very much the antithesis, very selfish, almost to the point of slovenly. The character of Kyoko, who, while this series isn't anything like Evangelion, is very much kind of the tsundere, Asuka Langley kind of character archetype. She's even got the red, that's her primary color, essentially. And we see that she's always eating, always snacking burgers, chicken dumplings, pocky and snacks, all this kind of stuff. And she's very much the sort of raucous, loudmouth, abrasive character that the Asuka Langley character is most known for being. And so you really do have shades of everything when you look at all of these different characters. You have Madoka, who's very much representative of innocence in a sense. You have Sayaka, who again is the selfless character. You have Kyoko, who is the selfish character. You have the Mami character, who's very much sort of the teacher or tutor, trying to, instill in at least Sayaka and Madoka, who haven't made the pact with, Kyubei as of yet. Throughout the course of the story, that's kind of part of their characterization, mulling over whether they want to or not. Whereas the Kyoko character has already befallen that fate, and she's very much trying to instill in them a sense of think about this ahead of time. And then, of course, you have Homura's character, who's very much sort of the stoic, aged, wisdom-befilled character who's been through this all before, and there's a lot about her character that's enigmatic as well. And it was a pleasant surprise for me because I felt, as I say, so much of the early going of this series was very much predictable. I saw it coming, I saw it telegraphed. I don't know whether that's a product of my being a Gen Urobuchi fan and just knowing kind of the choices he would make along the course of the story, whether it's that because I wasn't around for the first time that this series aired, I had probably seen subsequent anime series that had, cherry-picked different aspects of telling a story and doing similar kind of things, similar choices throughout the course of their stories, that just felt very reminiscent to me even while watching it. And so I was very perceptive in picking these things up all through the course of it, through those first 9 episodes. And thus felt underwhelmed in a sense all through that period. And then, like I say, with episode 10, suddenly Urobuchi, the Urobucher, if you will, as he's most commonly known, you can see those aspects throughout the course of the story where he got that name, killing off characters essentially. But his expertise in implanting the sci-fi element, the time travel element, his expertise in, delving into the characterizations of these characters, and then bringing it to a higher plane of intellect, which was unexpected for a series. You hear Magical Girl and you're thinking, oh, this is probably just going to be a group of high school girls. They have magic powers. Maybe they have a dark force they have to defeat, but everything's going to be happily ever after in the end. And that's very much not how this plays out. It's very much a bittersweet ending. It's something that really did get me misty and affected me much more than I thought it would, because there is a sense of the impact of loss, but there's also a sense of, basically making amends with the universe, making, things right again, and a sacrificial sort of, going forward in trying to make that all come together, trying to make that all conglomerate to a, official ending, if you will. And it was just absolutely miraculous, all of these aspects when put into play. Suddenly, I'm looking back on those first 9 episodes, which I felt through my first viewing of them were somewhat predictable and somewhat by the numbers. Suddenly, I'm having new awareness added to my perspective on it, and I am going to be very much chomping at the bit to go back and watch the series again with those last 3 episodes in mind, and I hear that there are also 3 films, the first 2 of which are essentially recaps of the entirety of the series, and then the third film, which has been recommended to me recently, is, from what I understand, a continuation but its own original story, with my favorite character out of the series, Homura, being essentially the main character of the film. And it definitely sounds highly intriguing. So, I mean, I couldn't more highly recommend Madoka Magica, as a series, as something you should definitely, put down whatever you're doing and go check out, because it's something that was a pleasant surprise to me, all told. In that early going, I could have almost given up on it and said, this is just, I've seen this all before, so many times before. And suddenly by episode 10, you have to really be invested in it and give it a chance and, stick with it for the long haul. You have to sort of let it play out before you really can appreciate what Gen Urobuchi put into this series. And again, with that deconstruction of the magical girl genre, while I'm not largely familiar with it, it definitely takes the vague aesthetics that I am familiar with and the assumptions I can make, what I've heard about the magical girl genre, and you can see where it's been twisted and it's been put under the microscope, and it's also been flipped on its ear in certain aspects. And that, to me, is a masterwork by the end of this series with what he managed to do with it. And so yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you've ever seen Madoka Magica. Is it as highly regarded for you as it is now for me? Even though in the early going it took a little while for me to actually get into it and everything like that. As I say, once I finally did, once I saw that time travel element and those higher echelon, sort of intellectual story properties coming into play, especially putting under the microscope, how tumultuous that age range for young teenage years is, especially for the girls involved in this story. And the aspect of how, there's a great parallel, without wanting to spoil, sort of a major aspect to the playing out of the story. There is a parallel between going from being a teenage girl to reaching womanhood and becoming a magical girl, and their fight, their ongoing battle with the witches that inhabit this world. And again, it's just one of the many facets that leave me gangbusters and just reeling. And so yeah, otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.